Good morning, students. So, today we are going to take up the essay Is There an Indian Way of Thinking? An informal essay written by A.K. Ramanujan, talking about the biographical detail of A.K. Ramanujan. A.K. Ramanujan is an Indian poet, scholar, and is specialized in linguistics, and he has written a plethora of works. And Is There an Indian Way of Thinking? Is one of those essays which is so famous for its different way of thinking. Now, here he proposes the idea of context sensitive thinking. What do you mean by context sensitive? That you have to take into consideration the context before analyzing anything. Not just literature, but almost everything. Even a decision within the life should be taken based on the context. So everything has got a different point of view, and the point of view is one or the other way is related to the context. You analyze, you look into a particular work of art, or let's say literature, from a specific context, and the context obviously justifies that work of art. And that's what Ramanujan says, but he comes up with a different understanding. It's not about literature that we talk about. We here talk about a way of thinking. So, without much delay, let's move on to the essay. First, let's start with the line of Walter Benjamin, or let's say a context which has been defined by A.K. Ramanujan. He starts with this: Walter Benjamin once dreamed of hiding behind a phalanx of quotations, which, like highwaymen, would ambush the passing reader and rob him of his convictions. So Walter Benjamin is another writer, is known for his concept of aura. He has written the art and reproduction, mechanical reproduction, which is one of the affluent essays that he has written, Walter Benjamin. And Walter Benjamin here talks about, and in that essay actually, Walter Benjamin talks about how art has gone through a sea change through mechanical reproduction. That is, in the modern age, it has become more mechanical. It has become, art in itself has become mechanical because of the influence of other technology and all the other facets of life. So it has a kind of a link to this context, that Walter Benjamin once dreamed of hiding behind a phalanx of quotation. Phalanx means large group of quotations, which, like highwaymen, would ambush the passing reader and rob him of his convictions. Highwaymen, what is the importance of highwaymen? Now, highwaymen are people who would ambush, who would attack passer-by and rob them. They are called as highwaymen. So, here Walter Benjamin says that he would like to hide behind a series of quotations. And what does that serve? Similarly, he would like to hide behind things like a highwayman. Here he says he wants to hide behind a phalanx of quotation. That is, he wants to focus more on certain quotations provided by certain writers or certain big people, and would ambush the passing reader and rob him of his convictions. That just like highwaymen used to attack the person or the people and rob them, like that he would also would like to ambush the passing reader and rob of his convictions. That every reader, one or the other way, has a kind of identity, or let's say not identity actually. Every reader, one or the other way, perceives certain books based on his own conviction. Let's say a book which endorses capitalism might not occur attractive to a person who endorses Marxism because of the ideological clashes, or the person believes in certain convictions and he doesn't want those convictions to be dropped off. So that's what Benjamin says, that he would ambush the passing reader and rob him of his conviction. That through the quotations, or through believing in certain quotations, he doesn't want certain readers to believe only in one thing. Let's say, no, as I have told you in one of the earlier classes, no one can step twice into a river. Now, that's a quotation. Now, it has different meanings attached to it. That is, no one can step twice into a river can be considered as in general terms. It might be in literal terms, it means that obviously nobody can step twice into a river. But in a metaphorical sense, it means that no one is able to undergo the first experience again and again. The first experience is always the best experience. So it's more like context sensitive, or based on the context you are understanding these things. Okay, so Walter Benjamin once dreamed of hiding behind a phalanx of quotations which, like highwaymen, would ambush the passing reader and rob him of his convictions. That is, Benjamin here wants to act as a person who would like to ambush, or let's say reject, or let's say cut the reader out of his conviction. He wants the reader to think beyond his beliefs. He might be a religious bigot, or he might be a person who believes in capitalism. He might be a person who believes in Marxism. But let's look at things from an objective level, or let's say contextual level. Now, why is this line put forward in the first line? Because Ramanujan, just like Walter Benjamin, wants to do the same thing. That this is what Ramanujan does. He wants to present different sides to a story. He doesn't want you to look from one point of view. He wants you to look from different point of view. It's like looking it's like looking at a person from different angles. He says, don't look at any person or story from one angle. Look at from different angles. In that way, you become more objective. So by citing Walter Benjamin's example, Ramanujan says that he wants you, that he had written this essay to present different sides to a story. So let's move on to the first section. So Stanislavski had an exercise for his actors. I don't think I have to mention or detail explain about who Stanislavski is. Stanislavski is known for his acting workshops, actually, years before that. He is considered to be one of the major propounders of acting, especially method acting. So Stanislavski, he used to train actors, actually. He has written numerous books about acting too. So Stanislavski had an exercise for his actors. And what was that exercise? He would give them an everyday sentence like, bring me a cup of tea, and ask them to say it 40 different ways, using it to beg, question, mock, wheedle, be imperious, etc. That is, how about, coming up with bring me a cup of tea? How can you beg, please bring me a cup of tea? Or let's say, bring me a cup of tea. Or question, bring me a cup of tea. Or mock, bring me a cup of tea. Wheedle, like interrogative. Wheedle in the sense that beg, actually. Begging, be imperious, etc. That you can utter this word in different ways. I think you are familiar with phonetics and all, stress and all. So this also becomes a part of it. That bring me a cup of tea can be pronounced in different. Can be pronounced in different tonalities. Like bring me a cup of tea, bring me a cup of tea, bring me a cup of tea. In different ways it can be pronounced. It is a kind of an exercise for his actors, that how a word can be used to define emotion. Let's say in Malayalam you have this word called nannayittundu. When somebody does a very good job, you say nannayittundu. And at the same time, when you shift the intonation pattern, it becomes like satirical. You're making fun of the person. Nannayittundu. You're making it sound absurd. So it's based upon your stress or intonation or tonal pattern. The word and its effect differs. My question is, Is there an Indian way of thinking? Is a good one for such an exercise. Now, Stanislavski had made use of bring me a cup of tea. Now I am making use of a different version, and my dialogue is like this. Is there an Indian way of thinking? It's a question. Is a good one for such an exercise, depending on where the stress is placed. Now, this is a very good question, but the meaning and the ideology of the sentence differs based on which word I am going to stress. Depending on where the stress is placed, it contains many questions, all of which are real questions asked again and again when people talk about India. Here are a few possible versions. Now, whenever we talk about India, this is one of the question that comes into being, and let's analyze this whole line from the point of view of being an Indian way of thinking. So here are a few possible versions. Now look at that. The first line there, you is put in italics. That means the stress is on is. Is there an Indian way of thinking? That's one way. That the first one is like asking that do we have such a kind of thing called Indian way of thinking? Next is there an Indian way of thinking? It means that there is only one Indian way of thinking. That is the reason why italics is put in an. Is there an Indian way of thinking? That do we have something called, we know that there is something called thinking, but do we really have Indian way of thinking? We have European thinking. We have, different kinds of thoughts. Do we have an Indian way of thought? Next, is there an Indian way of thinking? Does India have its own way? India has its own way of thinking. Now, different stress gives different questions, and now we are going to answer, or let's say Ramanujan is going to explicate what are the answers to these questions. He says the answers are just as various. There are a lot, but let's look at a few. Here are a few. There was an Indian way of thinking. There isn't any more. Yeah, that's the USP. There was an Indian way of thinking. That is, years before we had an Indian way of thinking. But today you don't have that Indian way of thinking. So it's not is, it is was. Obviously the answer should have been written in is, but it was because in the present context there is no Indian way of thinking according to Ramanujan. If you want to learn about Indian way of thinking, do not ask your modern day citified Indians. Go to the Pandits, Vaidyas, the old text. Now, in the context of the first question, that is there an Indian way of thinking? Ramanujan says, if you want to know what do you mean by Indian way of thinking, you should not go to modern day citified Indians. That is, people who had been born and brought up in cities, especially the modern people. Don't go there and don't ask them about it because they don't have any clue of what is an Indian way of thinking. Instead, you should go to the Pandits, the Brahmanical hegemony, or let's say the classes are given importance here by Ramanujan. Go to the Pandits, the Vaidyas. The old texts may be different kinds of, even Manusmriti, or let's say Ramayana, Mahabharata. On the contrary, India never changes. Under the veneer of the modern, Indians still think like the Vedas. On the contrary, that is, let's say, on the contrary, even if you consider it as completely wrong, Ramanujan says India never changes. That is, India has its own tradition, which obviously is being narrated by these Pandits and Vaidyas and old text. It's more one or the other way related to Hindu scriptures and Vedas. And India and its culture, obviously with its linkage to all these Vedas and cultures, would never change itself. It will always remain the same. Even though we feel that we have become so modern, India still have the root of tradition and culture within it. So therefore he says, even if we consider it as opposites, India never changes. Under the veneer of the modern, under the disguise of the modern, Indians still think like Vedas, that we have never changed. We are still not looking beyond the Vedas. Instead, we are still influenced by the Vedic culture that India had propagated years before. We are still thinking from the Vedic point of view, or let's say our understanding of India is more from Vedas and observations given by Pandits and Vaidyas and even the old scriptures. So this is the first question which has been answered, that is there an Indian way of thinking? Obviously, yes. And this Indian way of thinking is something which is marked by Vedas. Now let's look at the second question. Is there an Indian way of thinking? Is there only one Indian way of thinking? The second question might elicit answers like these. There is no single Indian way of thinking. There are great and little traditions, ancient and modern, rural and urban, classical and folk. Each language, caste and region has its special worldview. So, there is no single Indian way of thinking. You cannot say that Vedic culture is the perfect Indian way of thinking. No, because we are people, or we are a country where you have an amalgamation of different tradition. We have Parsis, we have Punjabis, we have Christians, we have Muslims, different varieties of traditions and culture. We have even Northeast. Therefore, we cannot say that there is no single Indian way of thinking. There might be numerous, because there are great and little. We have great traditions, and therefore we also have little traditions, which are obviously ancient, some even modern, some rural, some urban, some classical and some folk. Let's say Trishur Puram, Attugal, sorry, Attugal Pongala, then Urus Maholsavam, then folk element like even Pananda Patta. These are things of different tradition, and they believe in these things. Like let's say snake is considered to be Satan by Christians, but the same snake is being venerated by Hindus. So we have great tradition and also little tradition, some modern and some even urban and some even ancient. So each language, let's say Malayalam, Hindi, Kannada, Telugu, etc., caste, region has its special worldview. We cannot ignore any special caste. We cannot ignore any special region. Everything is important. So each language, each caste, each region gives us different ways of thinking. So under the apparent diversity, there is really a unity of viewpoint, a single supersystem. So he says, so under the apparent diversity, so we are unity in diversity, as said by Nehru, that we are diverse, our cultures are diverse, our understandings are diverse, and therefore these viewpoints are unified under a single supersystem, which obviously is called as India. Vedists see a Vedic model in all Indian thought. People who believe in Vedas see India from the context of those who believe in Veda see India from the context of or as a byproduct of Vedas, the four Vedas. Nehru made the phrase unity in diversity an Indian slogan. The Sahitya Academy's line has been Indian literature is one, though written in many languages. It's the same thing, that Nehru made the phrase unity in diversity. So even though it says we have different languages, so therefore obviously we also have different ways of thinking, and we have different people. Our ways of thinking are completely different. That's what Ramanujan says here. Even Sahitya Academy is of the view that Indian literature is one, though written in many languages. We have Bengali, we have Oriya, we have Marathi. So that defines the second one. Let's look at the third one. Is there an Indian way of thinking? Is it only about India? The third question might be answered. What we see in India is nothing special to India. That is, what we say as Indian culture or tradition is not actually something which only only is accommodative to Indians. It is it is nothing but pre-industrial, that is before industrial revolution. So obviously we have also attained certain cultures from Britishers or other European, people who have European settlers who had settled in India. Pre-printing press, before printing presses, face to face, agricultural, feudal, Marxist, Freudians, McLuhanites. McLuhanites means actually McLuhan. The word McLuhanites came from people who believes in education. That is McLuhan is an educational philosopher or scholar. So therefore you can say McLuhanites means people who give importance to education. All have their labels for the stage India is in, according to their schemes of social evolution. So, all have their labels for stage India is in, according to their schemes of social evolution. So, you have, so if you look at India is nothing but pre industrial. So, that is one or the other way, every kind of philosophy have influenced India. If you look at Marxism, Marxism is not a philosophy which is rooted in India. It has its origin in some other Germany, from Karl Marx. Sigmund Freud's interpretation of dreams or Freudian theory doesn't have its origin in India. But if you look at major philosophies and also literary works, Marxism and Freudianism and even McLuhanites form a part of Indian culture. So, in a way, Indians are good at adapting to changes and makes other cultures be part of it. That India is a kind of a receptacle or reservoir where different cultures can be accepted and also is accustomed to these changes. That's what Ramanujan says. According to their schemes of according to these change of the social system, Indians or India can accept these philosophies. India is only an example. So, others, of course, would argue the uniqueness of the Indian way and how it turns all things, especially rivals and enemies, into itself. That's also an interesting way that some people also argue that the uniqueness of India is that it is accepting all things, that even rivals and enemies. You have Jewish settlements in Kochi and Ernakulam and all. You have Jewish settlements. You have European settlers still living in India. Obviously, these are people who try to conquer us, but still they are living in India because we have our way of accepting our rivals and enemies. Look at what has happened to Indo-Europeans in India. They would say their language gets short with retroflexes. We have r as the retroflex sound. Their syntax with nominal compounds. They lose their nerve. The British are only the most recent example. That obviously Indo-European English is an Indo-European language. That it says one or the other way we have corrupted their language in one or the other way. Obviously we are trying to use different retroflex sounds within English and within all the other language. The British are that is the British English is one of the most recent example. Look what happens to Buddhism, Islam, the Parsis. There is an Indian way and it imprints and patterns all things that enter the corner. It is inescapable and it is bigger than all of us. So obviously, yes, there is an Indian way and imprints and patterns all things that enter the continent. That is Indian way here. Ramanujan says that whatever that comes its way, India accepts or India grasps. So when it enters into the Indian subcontinent, it becomes an Indian way of thinking. So it is a receptacle which accepts everything. So therefore we can say that yes, we have an Indian way of thinking, though one or the other way it has its own linkages to different cultures. And Indian way of thinking is bigger than all of us, let's say Marxist, Freudians or McLuhanites, whoever it is. The Indian way of thinking is much superior to all those thinking. Then comes the fourth or the last question. Is there an Indian way of thinking? Do we have such a kind of thought called thinking? Do we consider the Indian way as a kind of a thinking? The fourth question may question whether Indians think at all. That's a kind of a witty kind of question, that whether Indians think. Do Indians really think at all? It is the West that is materialistic. Rational. Indians have no philosophy, only religion, no positive sciences, not even a psychology. In India, matter is subordinated to spirit, rational thought to feeling, intuition. So the fourth question may question whether Indians think at all. That if you look at it, West is more materialistic, more rational. In one or the other way, that is right. Because I was recently teaching S4M English about the same thing, that why India has become a byproduct of colonial rule is because we never try to rephrase our whole constitution, or we never try to form new rules for us. Instead, we try to rephrase whatever Britishers has formed for us. We never came up with our own ideas. That's the reason why our country has become what it is right now. And obviously, our decisions are more influenced by religion, caste politics, etc. So much so that we don't focus much on the benefit of a civil society, whereas Britishers, or let's say Europeans, they give importance not to the caste politics, not to the religion, but to civil society. For the betterment of the society, they are ready to sacrifice these religious sympathies, whereas India is not ready to sacrifice their religious sympathies because of vote bank politics, etc. Same applies here, that it is the West that is material. West is materialistic, rational. Indians, if you look at it, they have no philosophy. They only have religion. They don't even have a positive sciences, not even a psychology. Yes, they haven't invested much upon psychology. In India, matter is subordinated to spirit. That is, spirit is given, spirituality is given more important, not the matter. Rational thought to feeling. Rational thought is not given important, but feeling, emotion is given, intuition, So emotion is given importance, not the reality. That has always been a problem. And even when people agree that this is the case, we can have arguments for and against it. But at the same time, Ramanujan says, I know even if I come up with that kind of an observation, there might be people who might be against this, at the same time who might support me. Some lament, others celebrate India's unthinking ways. One can go on forever. That some people lament the fact that we don't think much, whereas some people celebrate the fact that some others celebrate the fact that we don't think much, that is, even celebrating illogical things. So one can go on forever. Some people say that India's non-thinking or unthinking is what makes India unique. Some people say that India's unthinking makes it a bad country. So I think it justifies the last question, that is there an Indian way of thinking? Now it doesn't have a proper answer, because the question because he himself is confused about that question. So one can go on forever. We, that is Indians, I specifically certainly have stood in one or another of these stances at different times. We have not heard the end of these questions or these answers. Well, I myself has always been through this 4 stages, or I have always been thinking about this. Even I can come up with different versions of questions of these and different answers to these questions. The answers and even the questions are endless. This is what Ramanujan says in the first section. So that's it for today. We'll move on to the second in the next class. Thank you.